The time is 1914 and war has just begun. The war has been tough on millions. During the war, we've seen many new technologies being used, new mechanics, and inventions. In this video, I will be talking about technology and soldiers and how they tie to trench warfare in World War I. German forces pushing into France, the Germans dug in. So did the Allies. Thus began trench warfare, also known as War of Attrition. As the war raged on, and battles scoring death counts into thousands, stalemates were inevitable. The United Kingdom needs something to break these stalemates. As two British Army colonels named Ernest Swinton and William Hankey, Secretary of the Committee of Imperial Defense, championed the idea of an armored vehicle with conveyor belt-like tracks over its wheels that could break through enemy lines and traverse difficult territory. In the assembly line in England, many prototype tanks were made. One of the first was known as the Little Willie. The tank was small, it weighed 14 tons, got stuck in trench warfare, and drove at a speed of 2 miles per hour. Some men talked to the British Navy Minister, Winston Churchill. He believed the concept of a land boat. To keep the project secret from the enemy, they named the project a tank. A name so boring, no one would be suspicious. The year is now 1916. The Battle of the Somme is happening. The British and French forces deployed their first tank. This tank is much better than the predecessor, the Little Willie. The tank is called the Mark I. It is able to cross over trenches and couldn't be penetrated by enemy machine gun fire. Not only did the tank work well and support Allied infantry, it also struck fear into German forces. In November of 1917, the Battle of Cambrai saw the even more improved version of the tank, the Mark IV. During that battle, the 400 Mark IVs captured a total of 8,000 Germans. Before the invention of the tank, soldiers living in trench warfare had it tough. Shell shock, rats, and disease caused many problems, so many soldiers would die every push to gain a few hundred feet. When the tank came into combat, it saved many lives while also providing protection and support to gain more territory. Soldiers in World War I had very little protection. At the start of the war, they didn't even have metal helmets. Having a tank to tank all of the enemy's fire saved many lives and were able to get the battle moving. Inside the tank, it was very hot. The crew shared the same compartment as the engine, so it could get very hot. Sometimes, if the tank were to take a hit in a certain area, it could cause the bolts to lock and metal plates to pop out and bounce along the interior, inflicting harm on the crew inside. The soldiers had to wear thick leather clothes and chain mesh helmets. There are two types of Mark IV tanks, the Mark IV male and female. The Mark IV male was armed with two 6-pounders, a powerful gun that fired high explosive rounds. The Mark IV female was armed with machine guns only. The Mark IVs have an effective thickness of 4 inches of armor. Not only did soldiers need protection from machine gun fire, soldiers in the war needed protection from gas. The Germans used gas attacks to kill many soldiers, so the gas mask was made. It protected the soldiers from the poisonous gas. In trench warfare, the gas could linger around the trenches for several days, claiming the lives of many. The first working gas mask was made by an Englishman by the name of Garrett Morgan. The gas mask worked by having dipped in anti-gas chemicals, making them able to neutralize the gas for safe breathing. The French used tear gas grenades against the Germans, while the Germans used chlorine. Thus began the growth of chemical warfare. Let's play Find the Safe Trench. Is it A, B, or C? Answer: it is not A because A has gas. It is not C because there's a landmine. It is B because there's nothing there that can hurt you, other than the artillery. Moving on, the German offensive had prototype tanks, but they were never used until they were modified for World War II. On April 22, 1915, the Germans lost many huge gas attacks in an area in Belgium and Yves. There was over 150 tons of chlorine gas. A large amount of gas drifted into Allied trenches, killing many. The typical French soldier in World War I was equipped with a knife or sword, a revolver handgun, and a 3-round magazine rifle, known as a Lebel rifle. The rifle had a range of over 300 yards. The usual Tommy, a British soldier, was equipped with a bolt-action rifle. It had 15 rounds and could kill at 1,400 yards. They were also equipped with a revolver and a bayonet. One of the most important weapons of World War I was the machine gun. It had a firepower of 100 men. They usually needed a crew of 4 to 6 to operate successfully. Planes, 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 and lots of planes. World War I had many large dogfights with planes. Most planes in World War I were biplanes. Biplanes are the earliest planes. They have 2 wings, one above the other. There are even some triplanes. They carried bombs and machine guns. You may know a famous German pilot that is known as the Red Baron. His real name is Manfred von Richthofen. He was an ace to the skies and destroyed many Allied planes. He was credited with 80 destroyed enemies and 80 victories. Artillery was a beast in World War I. Being a loader for an artillery piece was rather safe. You were miles away from combat. Artillery was really accurate with the right intel. The French army had strong artillery, but the Germans had a lot better artillery. The German artillery was more accurate, had more high explosive filler in the shells, and could be reloaded faster. Did you know that the Germans fired over 370 million artillery rounds? It is very rare, but it is possible that an artillery round could hit a tank. In the Battle of the Somme, a tank was struck by an artillery round and the tank was obliterated. Most tanks were destroyed by landmines. If a tank's track were to be destroyed, the tank was usually abandoned because there was rarely enough spare parts for a successful repair. A unique and new invention of World War I was the flamethrower. It is like a lawn blower, but with fire. Though they were new, they were only brought into service in 1917, and only by the Germans. The Germans called the flamethrower a Flaffenwerfer. The Flaffenwerfer had a range of 20 yards. The Flaffenwerfer only needed 1 soldier to operate. The main purpose was to scare enemies and make them fall back. It was usually unsuccessful. Boats that traveled from Europe to America had it rough. The Germans had a god of the seas, a U-boat submarine. The sub was very stealthy. It was able to kill at a range of 700 meters. The German Beast had a crew of 36 and traveled with a slow speed of 15 knots. The sub was armed with an 8.8 centimeter cannon on its deck of the sub that could annihilate any aircraft in its vicinity. It also fired a 5-meter-long torpedo. The main purpose of U-boats was to form a naval blockade. The U.S. was selling weapons to the Allies, and the Germans didn't like it, so they put U-boats everywhere and destroyed a total of 3,000 Allied ships. In World War I, blood banks were made. A blood bank is a refrigerated area that houses many different blood types. During the war, doctors discovered that people have different blood types and that blood could be refrigerated. Captain Oswald Robinson, a U.S. doctor, said the point was to have a blood supply as close to the front as possible for wounded patients. They could keep blood refrigerated so many lives could be saved if a soldier lost a lot of blood or got wounded. George S. Patton was a general through World War I and World War II. George was a tank commander. He was one of the first people to command tanks in the combat. First, he trained people in tank schools in France, then later went into combat. Though he was very aggressive, his troops suffered the fewest casualties. He would drive an M5 Stuart light tank with a mediocre armor and great speed during World War I. In the end, World War I brought humanity many new technologies and inventions that we still use to this day. We learned about the different soldiers and trench warfare. Though these inventions are great, we lost so many lives to